what we hope a significant number of sessions where we can meet candidates for city council and the mayor's race. We're having some good conversations, trying to get people scheduled, as well as doing a questionnaire, which we'll of course make public. So I want to thank you. My name is Nate Hurto. I'm one of the co-founders, along with Karen Johnson, of Save Delray. And one of the things that we thought it would be important to do is have candidates hear from you, talk with you, present their perspectives on issues that are specific to Delray. There's certainly a lot of citywide conversations that will be here. So we're going to start off with Jimmy Lewis, who reached out quite a while ago to hear a little bit about what we're about, and asked to meet with everyone. And so we really appreciate that extension. And so what we're going to do today is we've got about an hour session. So we're going to kick off. I'm going to turn this over to Jimmy, let him introduce himself in his own words, talk through presentation, then do an open Q&A session. So we'll take this to about 8:20, and then we'll close. I believe in ending meetings on time, if not early. So we're going to shoot for 8:29. And then what we will make the recordings available. So just some ground rules for everyone, because I don't think any good meeting starts without everybody being on the same page. So we do want you to ask the questions. There's not going to be filters. There's not going to be rephrasings. There's not going to be note cards, etc. A lot of the things that people express some frustration about, especially during zoning for housing and the arena, we want you to ask in your own questions, and we want you to be able to follow up. So please raise your hand. If you don't feel comfortable speaking, you can always put it in the chat, which is available, and we'll have you go ahead and do that. As we are all neighbors, we want to make sure that no matter what our positions are, and disagreements are fine, but we want to make sure that we keep this respectful, both for our neighbors as well as for the candidates. So just make sure you talk to people like the way you'd want to be spoken with. I don't think that's going to be an issue. I think most of the folks that are on this call, or most of the folks that we've spoken with about topics around Save Delray, really just want to have a better dialogue. And if somebody breaks all those rules, then we might mute you or boot you out of the meeting. But our objective here is really just to create a conversation about the issues that Save Delray was really organized around keeping the neighborhood the special place that it is, and not just turning it into Potomac Yard or Ballston or wherever we have. So with that, we didn't want to have a big to-do. So Jimmy, I'm going to go ahead and stop sharing, and I will turn it over to you to kick things off.
Awesome. Well, thank you guys so much for having me and for organizing this. I really appreciate it. It's a beautiful day outside. It's a little later, but I'm sure, you can all be outside enjoying sort of our bug-free, we're sort of in the bug-free part of the summer. But for those of you who I've not met yet, and I think I've had a chance to correspond with some of you, my name's Jimmy Lewis. I'm running for city council. I live on the West End. If you know where Shooter McGee's is, they're my next door neighbor right on Duke Street. For those who don't know Shooter McGee's, I'm right by the Home Depot, right off of South Pickett. I've been in the city 13 years, and I've actually had a chance to live in multiple places in the city. And I think that provides me a unique perspective to understand that each one of our neighborhoods in the city is very different, and each one of them provides a unique strategic advantage that makes us Alexandria, and not Arlington or Fairfax or Montgomery County. So when I first moved to the area, I lived at Fox Chase. Then I lived in South Old Town by the Balducci's for 6.5 years. Lived in North Old Town and had a chance to get really involved in Notice, the North Old Town Civic Association, and shaping a lot of the development in that part of the city. And that's sort of one of the parts of the city where the Civic Association and the city staff and the developers actually have a fairly good relationship. And when developers are considering a project, Notice is sort of their first stop. And then that feedback actually shapes the projects, as opposed to sort of it just being a check the box exercise. And a lot of the things we advocated for were community serving retail, open space at grade, and continuing that neighborhood's views of the river, which is a really important thing to everyone who currently lives there and everyone who would want to live there. And then in February of 2020, my husband and I bought our place here on the West End. So yeah, as I said, I've been involved in the local Democratic Committee. I'm the LGBT Dems Vice Chair for Communications, served on the state steering committee for the Democratic Party, having served as the state Young Dems president during the 2017 election, where we helped our young people knock down 120,000 doors, and we helped swing all 3 statewide offices and then flip 15 seats in the House of Delegates. So a lot of good experience, like actually working and winning elections. But here locally, I've been involved in the Democratic Committee. I'm the vice president of the West End Business Association. So as we start talking about, we're not getting an arena, but we all know that we've all known and now know even more that we have to grow our commercial base. I'm one of the only candidates with some experience in that space. And I believe I'm actually the only candidate who's served on a civic association. When we moved out to this part of the world, we got the Homes Run Civic Association started in a very different civic association than the rest of the city because we're 14 communities, 7 condos, 6 apartment buildings, and 23 townhouses that have an HOA. So very different than your standard civic association, given that most of our neighbors live in a high rise. We're garden style, but almost everybody else is a high rise. And then most involved, I chair the city's traffic and parking board, have been on that board for just going over 11 years now. And I'm the current chairman. And really what we do is implement safety measures block by block, thinking about all of our users, pedestrians, bicyclists, transit riders, and drivers, to make sure that all of our roads work and are safer for everyone. Last year, we hit a goal with Vision Zero. We had no traffic fatalities in 2023, which was a huge step forward. Unfortunately, this year we've had a traffic fatality, so we clearly still have work to do to make sure that all of us are safe, regardless of how we get around the city. And that actually brings me to some of the key points I'm running on for city council. So one, of course, is pedestrian safety. Have a lot of experience working on that. 2 is mental health. Right now, 20% of our mental health public facing roles in the city are vacant. So that's just a broader challenge of our recruit and retain. But we also know that COVID was hard on everyone, especially our young people in schools and our older Alexandrians. Loneliness and isolation is still a huge challenge. And then, what I went to this afternoon actually was a Narcan training because the opioid overdose rate, in particularly on the western end of the city, is really high. And of the 23 opioid overdose deaths we had last year in Alexandria, 3 of them were people under the age of 18. And those all happened on our side of the city. So through WEBO, we partnered with the city's public health department to try and get more Narcan out into the community. So a quick 20-minute training, and every one of those folks left with Narcan to put in their first aid kit at their business. In addition to mental health, really focused on public safety. We know that, for a long time, we have sort of not had the sort of robust retention of our firefighters, police, EMTs, sheriffs, deputies that we need. So I think, collective bargaining was going to be a part of that effort, but we need to make sure that that remains a priority. And that also remains very true with our teachers as well. We know that we're losing teachers at an alarming rate to other jurisdictions, and it's not just because they pay more money. So those are some of the things that are super top of mind for me. Mental health, growing our commercial base, public safety, and then finally sustainability, I think, is something I always want to hit on. We have a really great plan to get us to carbon zero by 2050. What are we waiting on? And I think one of our most key components there is our single family homes, which I think we're going to get into here today. When it comes to flood mitigation, climate change, et cetera, our single family homes are where the vast majority of our mature tree canopy lives in the city beyond sort of our protected areas. That's also where the water is going, is down in people's front yards and backyards instead of into flooding other homes. And we know that the areas of the city without yards tend to be the ones that have the worst sort of flooding impacts in the city. So really is sort of all of that sustainability wrapped up together is preventing flooding, managing flooding, but also ensuring that we have a mature tree canopy, not just on city property, but that mature tree canopy and those sustainability efforts extend to individual homes, multifamily residential, as well as commercial space. So I though find that these are always the most engaging when we have sort of Q&A. So I'll just stop there so we can get the Q&A started a little bit earlier.
All right. Well, I'm going to start you off with a question, and I promise it's not a gotcha for other folks. So one of the things that you touched on, and as we were looking, through your background, I think the sustainability and the flooding is certainly something that a lot of the folks, especially on the east side of Delray, have to deal with. We've also seen a large number of tear downs, which I think we've seen accelerate since zoning for housing. We've got a number of properties, probably the most infamous of which is at the corner of Euler and Commonwealth. It was about a $900,000, maybe $1 million farmhouse on a nice large corner lot that was subdivided into two $2.3 million duplexes with incredibly large ADUs. So the amount of permeable space is certainly reduced. So my question to start things off would be, how would you balance out the want for development and obviously a lot of the free market for development with what is clearly a developer driven purchase, scrape, and rebuild. So taking some of those very historic 1920s homes and converting them into very large parcels that not only impact the historic character, but also, the permeability and the environmental sustainability as well.
Yeah, I think what's important is nothing like this can be looked at without looking at each project individually, right? We know that all of these things are all priorities for us, and that one domino falls and it impacts all the rest of these. So I think what we have to do, yes, there's always the free market. Let's just start at I'll start at the thing. So for me, zoning for housing, I think a lot of that was an important step. The idea that we're going to build more garden style units, that's absolutely something we want to be doing. But I also think what we did in that process was we made it a lot easier for people to do things by right. And when you do things by right, it takes them out of the special use permit process, the designated special use permit process, which is how the city is able to extract those developer contributions, whether it's flood mitigation, whether it's, if it's a bigger project, additional affordable housing, if it's sometimes it's just improvements to the immediate intersection serving that home. That process is what gets us the ability to get the developers for these projects to make those contributions to the city, so that when we're balancing the scales of the cost benefit, we end up either closer to even or with the city coming out advantageously in the situation. What we did was we took that whole process away for a large number of homes, which then means that these projects aren't going to go through that process, that you can just do it by right, and that by right doesn't in any way meet the city's need other than potentially creating more housing supply. And I use the word potentially because there's nothing in our rules that require developers to build that missing middle that we're looking so aggressively for. Those $200,000, $300,000, $400,000, even $500,000 units here fit into that missing middle. And as the example you gave, right, a $900,000 house became $2 billion plus homes. That's not what we need in the city. And I think what was really frustrating is the staff in the city also said, if we do what Arlington did, it's not going to get us any more affordable housing. What did we do? So I think that's what's the potentially to me just sort of we've been asking the wrong questions, I think, as a city for a very long time about these issues. A lot of these components were things that were already being approved anyway by council. It's not like these projects weren't moving forward. Instead, what we did, instead of making these projects move forward with the SUP and the DSUP process, we allowed them all to happen by right, which then means we're able to exact less control, and we're not able to exact their voluntary contributions, but most other communities call them proffers. So I think that's a real sort of problem with the way that we think about it and the way that we're doing business as a city is, we specifically want a type of housing that is affordable for people in that middle, those folks sort of at 80% to 120% of annual median income as a community. Nothing that we did actually requires those things to be built. What requires those things to be built is members of council holding back their votes on projects until we get what we want and need in a community. I think a great example of that was Del Pepper holding back her vote on Landmark Mall until there were affordable owned units on that project site. That actually moved the needle. That's actually going to build the type of units we need in the city that meet that demand in the missing middle. Another example too is the project opposite Braddock Road, and I know that they've run into some problems with financing, but that project, two members of council held back their votes until there was additional affordable housing added, until the developer agreed to do a lot of stormwater mitigation and flood mitigation in that area. At the end of the day, we came up with something that is going to be better for the city in the long run, but that none of that happened through an administrative process. It happened because members of council held back their votes until we got what we needed as a city. So I think that's the way we should be looking at these problems. And then I would also say, just on that too, like, we can't always, you know, everything is a negotiation. I think we also need to, as a community, be clearer with developers as projects are moving forward about what specific proffers we want. Because right now we sort of hand them a list of things and we say, these are the things we'd like, tell us what you're going to do. And we know that each individual neighborhood has very different and very specific needs. And we're sort of using a one size fits all approach. What we want out here on the West End in a new development is very different than what North or South Old Town's going to want, or what Delray is going to want versus the Eisenhower Valley. So yes. So I'll go ahead and stop there. Hopefully that answers your question, Nate. But I think, I think that's a specific example, but I hopefully was trying to paint a broader picture of where I think we've gone right and where we've gone wrong and how we do these things.
Got it. Thanks. That did address the question. So I see that Erin's got her hand up. Erin, if you want to come off mute and ask your question, you're next.
Yes, this is actually a follow-on. So with the zoning for housing, it seems to me that the genie's out of the bottle. Is there any way in your mind to pull that back or to get any more control out of development, particularly here in Delray?
I think we absolutely can get more control on it by doing a couple of things, which is one, a lot of these projects, even if they're moving by right, or well, if they're moving by right, they don't have this process, but a lot of these projects are still going to trigger the SUP process. I think what we need to do with that is we need members of council being very specific about what it is going to require to get them to vote yes on a project. And I think we just saw this where the current council voted against a project that really didn't fit with the neighborhood, right? I think that that is an important message to be sent, that it is not just whatever you want to build. It has to fit within our neighborhood and it has to fit what we specifically need. Otherwise, it's going to be a no. So I think that's really part of it. Sometimes saying no is the most important thing you can do. I also think we need to hold it back. And then I think we need to be very specific too with staff, since a lot of this stuff is happening at the administrative level, of what our priorities are and what sorts of things are not our priorities. And I think that's probably the hardest thing to do. And then I would agree with you. I think this is done. I don't know that there's anyone running for mayor in particular who has a particular interest in revisiting this issue. I do know there is a dashboard and some studies that are going through, but we also know that the city has a grant to implement zoning for housing phase 2, which we don't know what that exactly is going to look like yet either. But I do think what we need to do is really look at what's happening right now, because the changes we're seeing right now, we always have to remind ourselves are happening with a 9% interest rate where capital is hard to come by. What you can build with a 9% interest rate is not what you can build with a 3% interest rate. So I think as rates eventually come down, we're going to see a lot more people taking advantage of the opportunities created by zoning for housing. And I think we need to see what all of that looks like before we take any additional steps.
Thanks, I appreciate that. Erin, did that answer all your question before we move on to Kathleen?
Yes, thank you.
Great. So Kathleen, you're up here.
I wanted to follow up on Aaron's question on zoning for housing. That the case is in the Arlington courts and it's now in the Alexandria courts. And I think so many of the council people do not seem to be aware that this was based on Maine, the state of Maine, in September 2020, instituted this zoning for housing. 3 years later, in September 2023, it ruled it was unconstitutional. And I think when, talking, is there anything we're going to be able to do about this? I would hope there's some plan with staff. What if they throw this out in court? What if they say, that this won't fly? They threw it out in Maine because not only was it unconstitutional, but they said it was unviable in terms of environmental impact. And I think the process was not well done with zoning for housing, that several members of council were discussing having private discussions starting last February, but it didn't really become public until February 2023, when Agenda Alexandria did a very good program. And then the council voted. They had 3 days of hearings. And I think it was like 23 hours, but very little of that was reflected in the hearings. What I'd like to know from Jimmy is 2 members of the council at that time objected. There's 9 parts to this zoning for housing, and they wanted it voted separately. If it comes back to the council and they have to separate it, what would be your thought and what would be your tendency to vote as a potential council member if this goes back to the council? And what role does this, some of these other city agencies have? I think I had not realized till the past year with the arena debacle and also this, how much power some of these people, like the economic development with Stephanie Landrum, was able to spend $700,000 of city money with no public hearing, debate, or discussion. And I wonder what, should this come back to the council, what would be your approach?
Yeah, I think lumping it all together was a terrible idea. It doesn't make sense to do it that way. The idea that we can only do things if we do, essentially saying that you can't have a piece of pie, you have to eat the whole pie, right? That's not, to me, a good way of doing business. It's not a clear way. You also then don't know, like, I have a science background, right? My undergrad's in biology. When you have multiple variables, you don't know which variable is changing your experiments. So if our goal is to get this additional missing middle, we don't know which of these 9 elements it is that got us those products built, or where the problem potentially is. So I think it's important that when we do big things, that we take them step by step and do them. There's nothing wrong with holding 9 individual votes on each one of these things. I worked on the Hill for 6.5 years. The only time we put everything together is when we are giving people a reason that they have to vote yes on something. You get funding for the military base in your district, you get funding for a new bridge, so you have to vote for everything else in this project. So that's sort of my that's sort of my background on it is, when we do those things on the Hill, it's because we are trying to force people to vote a certain way. I also think too, the way that this was advertised, that the city attorney's office said it was unseverable because of the way it was advertised. That's not great attorney work. That's not great legal work. We should have things that allow the council to act the way the council wants to procedurally. We should not have our hands tied by a decision made by the city attorney's office or by a decision made by staff. The council is where the buck stops. The council is the only people accountable to the people of Alexandria, and it should be their responsibility to look at everything individually. And if it means taking 9 votes, the meetings are running till 1 o'clock in the morning anyway. What's the point of running it till 1:30? And I think that's something that, as chair of the traffic and parking board, I try and do a lot, is if there are multiple elements to a project, we hold a vote on every single element of that project. I also think that that's particularly helpful for staff when they're trying to explain it to the community, because then we're having a discussion about why we are doing each piece of this. It is clear to everyone, everyone is on the same page about it. So that's that. I think on the components of this, as I said, the building more garden style, big fan of garden style. I live in one. They are much better for, they've got a lot of sustainability components to them. They offer the ability for on-site energy generation. They also have a lot more trees than some of these other projects. So I think that, there are elements of the zoning for housing that are really important. I've said this before on the specific element that folks seem to have the most concern about, which is the elimination of the single family zoning. I'm not a fan of taking tools out of the toolbox. If we wanted to change the map, but we don't know what we're going to need in 20 years as a city. So why are we taking things out of the code that we might potentially need when we have the ability, the zoning map is part of the city code. If we just want to go and change all the zones, that would make more sense than taking a tool out of the toolbox and saying we're never going to need this again. And then finally to the AEDP, I actually think that they play a really important role in the city. I think I'd actually like to see us leverage those public-private partnerships more with ARHA, the industrial development agencies as well, and the regional agencies, so we can go after projects and money that a city necessarily can't go after, but that these organizations can go after. And they also have some unique bond financing things that they can do that don't necessarily risk our credit rating. So I think those are things that are important, but I think what's really important about AEDP fundamentally is we have to be very clear about what we want and what type of businesses we want them going after. We know that we need commercial growth in the city because right now we're upside down. 82% of our revenue is coming from residents of the city, either homeowners paying their taxes or people who live there paying their taxes through their landlords. That's unsustainable in the long term. And so what we need to do is direct AEDP on what specifically we want to go after. We've all started having a conversation about the North Potomac Yard site. We know that that's designed and was always envisioned as a large commercial generation engine for the city. What do we want there? And I think just saying continue the innovation corridor is a buzzword. I think we need to be very specific about what type of innovation we want. And what I've been talking a lot about is we need to look at biomed and unmanned aviation. We've got the Boeing headquarters, we've got DCA, and we also have Virginia Tech. They have all of those organizations have a great expertise in unmanned aviation. Those are good paying jobs. And those are jobs that are going to be here in 2100, not just in 2050, but in 2100. So I think hopefully that answered all of your pieces, Kathy, but I think, it's about being specific across the board, whether it's specific with the residents about why you're voting on this piece, yes or no, or why we're directing AEDP to go after this type of business.
So if the thing on zoning does come back to the council, you're willing to rethink what they should have maybe done the first time?
Well, if it gets thrown out in court, I mean, I think there are elements of it that everyone agrees make sense. And if it does get thrown out in court, there are elements that will probably be considered constitutional or valid that we absolutely should revisit. But I think we need to make those votes individually so that you can tell your constituents, if I'm lucky enough to be up there, so I can come back to you and say, I voted yes on part A because of Y. I voted yes on part B because of X, Y, and Z. That's, I think, the responsibility of people in government is to listen and then make a decision, and then also to communicate back why they made the decision that they made. Because we know Alexandrians are smart, we know they're educated, they're also reasonable people. And I think reasonable people can disagree as long as you're having a conversation. If you're treating people like they don't know what they're talking about, then that's a different story. But I think most people are reasonable and can have a conversation. But you need to be specific instead of saying, well, these 10 reasons and the need for the missing middle is the reason I voted on these 6 things. No, how does that get you the missing middle that we so desperately want and need? Those homes for first-time home buyers, those homes for firefighters and teachers and police officers. So I think we have to be more accountable to people and with each vote and being very specific as to why we did X, Y, or Z.
Thank you.
Thanks. Kathleen, did that answer your question?
It did. Yes, thank you.
Great. So I've got Rhonda, Kate, then Paul, and I saw Kate and Paul, I think, right about the same time. So I think that's the order we've got there.
Great. Thanks, Nate. Hi. Yeah, you started to touch on it a little bit. And in your opening dialogue, you mentioned growing our commercial base. And I was just interested in, what your philosophy was and ideas around that. And you did start touching on that. So anything that you'd like to further share would be appreciated.
Yeah, I think in the specific to Potomac Yard site, that's absolutely, innovation, but in the biomed and unmanned aviation space, look, if somebody comes in with a great fintech idea, I'm not opposed to it. But I think that those are the elements we should be looking at for there, just sort of giving the larger ecosystem that's in that area. But we also have to look at Eisenhower Valley. There's not a lot of land left in the city. So what are we going to put in Eisenhower Valley that grows our commercial base in the long term? And then I also think what's really important, this comes from my sort of work with the West End Business Association and Old Town North Partnership, which is it's a citizen and business group sort of together as the partnership. We've got to look at what we've already got here. What are we doing to help our local businesses that are already here be successful and thrive? There's vacant retail space in the city. That's not good for anyone, especially in a city that is tourist driven. So what are we doing to help people get started? And I can say, and childcare is another great example. The second you open a childcare facility in the city, it's full. But I know people who are going on 2+ years of paying rent and still don't have their occupancy permit to get started. New York City can do this in one page, and in Alexandria, it takes 7 or 8 trips to City Hall to get your occupancy license to open a business in the city. For me, my business is just me and my computer. So it was just one trip to the courthouse and I was done. But if you've got a space in this city that you're actually doing business out of, it's multiple trips to multiple offices and sometimes waiting because only one person in that office is allowed to sign off on something. So if they're on vacation, that slows down the whole process until that one person comes back and signs it. And then if you do need to come before a board, a lot of these boards only meet on a monthly basis. So, but one thing I am particularly really interested in, and I'm curious if I'm going to pitch an idea and curious to see if you guys like this. But in talking to a lot of people and talking about the old Health and Human Services building right there on Mount Vernon, I'm a big fan of us potentially looking at a retail incubator in the city that would get retailers sort of a chance to get started because we do have so much vacant retail space in the city. So why not create a space that maybe, so I'm thinking of a model like down in Roanoke, there's this really cool place called Cafeteria. They've anchored it with a record store, a brewery, and a coffee shop, but then they have all these other sort of retail spaces that are available for people to sort of get started. And then once you get to a point where you're large enough, you move out into your own commercial space. So that's something I've been thinking about a little bit is how do we really not only bring in bigger businesses into the city, but also how do we grow what's here? We've got a lot of great people. I'm thinking of like Bradshaw Hot Sauce Company down in Delray. They make great product. Are there opportunities for us to have a space like that they can get going? And, at the end of the day, they're probably never going to have a retail store. That's just not, hot sauce does not need a store. But there are other types of businesses in Alexandria that are making really great products. And Made in ALX down in North Old Town, they have a wait list of people trying to get in there to sell products. So are there opportunities for us to grow the commercial base by supporting our local businesses as well? I mean, Port City just became best beer in the world. Wouldn't it be great if we had other businesses in Alexandria that were able to grow and scale and be as successful as Port City or Aslan is?
Well, I think I'll just jump in. I think it's a great idea. And for, several years ago, gosh, maybe 20 years ago, what's now Caliber Collision, which was Audi, which was Jack Taylor. There was a conversation about utilizing that space for something similar, and it just never got off the ground. It wasn't, I don't think it was time for that idea. But if you look at Union Market, I think what you're describing would fit that Union Market model, where some of those incubator businesses have moved to storefronts in other parts of DC. So I think it's a great idea, and it would be a way to connect Del Rey with Alexandria and also with Old Town and Crystal City, make it a little more of a destination, because we are losing retail here.
Yeah, I mean, there's a vacant retail spot too, right on the corner of the unit block, 100 block of King Street, which it's a pedestrian plaza now. And that's not a great look, especially for a tourist town, to have a vacant corner spot right there. So, and the same is true with Commonwealth and Mount Vernon. There's a chunk of vacant retail there.
Yeah.
Well, there's going to be a school there.
I know the Montessori is coming in at where the old gas station was.
Well, you mean like SunTrust?
Or is it the SunTrust? It's right there, right at the intersection of Mount Vernon and Commonwealth.
That's at the old Anthony's Auto Works is where the Montessori's coming in. But are you referring to the print shop that I guess it's Truist now, where the
Oh no, I was
that's
talking about
empty?
the auto body shop that's turning into the Montessori school.
Yeah.
Yeah, I know ASAP Printing's actually now on our side of town. I have to go pick up something from them tomorrow, actually. They printed some additional letterhead for me. So it's actually a shorter trip for me to go to their new location and pick it up.
Okay. I think Kate had to drop Paul, so I think that moves Paul up to the next question, and then Kathleen will come back to you as well.
Okay, I'm here.
Okay. Thanks
Hi.
very much.
Can you hear me?
Which Paul is
Paul,
it?
I'm sorry, Paul Linehan.
I'm sorry, who's up?
Paul Linehan.
Me? Okay, thanks. Thanks very much for your time tonight, and thanks for organizing this. I have a quick question about what you mentioned earlier. There seems to be a disconnect between the staff and the citizens about what we want, the vision and strategic vision for the city.
Yes.
And so you get to the point where, you all have to vote. And then, like you said, sometimes you're kind of painted in a corner by either the city attorney or the staff or whatever. I had a conversation with an elected official who told me, I'm just an elected official. The people that really run the city are the staff and the city manager. So I told this individual, well, I didn't vote for them. I voted for you. So what's your vision about making sure that the city government actually represents the desires of the sort of citizens that, that call this place their homes? Thank you.
I've been through, this is my third director of tests as I've been on this traffic and parking board. So I've been through a couple of different leadership. I have no problem deferring an issue. I know it's a little harder on council level because people are committing the time to come and testify in the public hearing, but I have no problem deferring an issue if it's not ready for limelight. If there needs to be more community outreach, I have on multiple occasions deferred them, and what comes back ends up being a better product, almost universally. I'm trying the Warwick Village traffic circle that's coming up for a vote. That issue was discussed, and when we went to vote on it, the Warwick Village people showed up and were like, you guys didn't talk to our civic association at all. What did we do? We pulled it off the docket. We did not address it. We sent them back to go talk to that community, and now we've got a project that's moving forward that I think everyone has signed on for. So first off, I have no problem doing that. Second off, it's one thing to say that, yes, they're running it full time. It is a part-time council, but it is council's job to give them the strategic direction. That's why we were elected. It's our job to say, these are the things you need to do. These are the priorities. Go and execute on this list. And so I did my grad work at the Army War College. So they sort of teach it to us at like 3 levels, right? You've got your strategy that's coming down from the generals. You've got your operational team, which is like your colonels and lieutenant colonels. And then you've got your tactical elements, which is your captains and down. they are the operational people. They are not setting the strategy. It is their job to operationalize the strategy that they are given from the people who were elected by you. So that's two things. One, I have no problem deferring it. And two, we need to be clearer with them. And I think, unfortunately, a lot of the processes in the city are very designed around the city manager because it is a part-time council. You know, the city manager proposes their budget and then it's an add delete. I don't know that that process is going to be changed, but working on the Hill and, you know, personally, budgets are a moral document, right? That is a statement of priorities. I think there needs to be a lot more clarity going into that process from council about priorities to the city manager before something comes forward.
Awesome. Thanks, Paul. Did that answer your question before we move on to Paul DeCourt? Good. Okay, cool. Thanks. Paul DeCourt, the field is yours, and then Kathleen will have your second question after that.
All right, that's
Okay.
fine. Hi, Mr. Lewis, you were kind enough to address some concerns I wrote to you, which was separate from this Zoom meeting and coincidental, and you've addressed, I think, the issues of additional housing and affordable housing. And we talked about density, which I want to touch on in a moment. So if I may sum up from what you have written to me, and I had written all this down to share with everyone, but
Yep.
some other time for that. But you seem to believe in smart and appropriate land development and the city taking a more aggressive stance with developers.
Mhm.
And as you've been pointing out, the direction coming from above and not sort of what am I trying to say? Sort of generating its own life in staff, which I have noticed somewhat in the years. I've been here 40 years. So all of that's very good. It's very good to hear. So I have to applaud you on the answers you've provided so far. The one on density was a concern of mine because, as many people don't know yet, but Alexandria is the sixth most densely populated mid-sized city in the United States. Already, we have that cities of 100,000 to 250,000. So we're somewhere in the middle of that. And it raises some interesting questions about where you're going to put the people. But you've already addressed, and you addressed to me, and I think you repeated tonight, there are certain sort of smart places to build more density. Transit hubs. I have a concern about the transit corridor that runs along Route 1 nearby. And I'm not sure what to call that, but it seems to have limited transportation utility, and yet we're seeing a lot of higher rise buildings be built there. I hope all that works out. Other areas that have more direct connection with metro stations, for example, could be pretty well served, and certainly candidates for higher density. So you've talked about places like Eisenhower Valley and in the north end of Old Town, and all of this is appropriate. And as an architect, I can see that. I can see this, the planning behind it. I'm a little concerned about what's been talked about and done about single family zones in the city. You address that. We don't need to get back into that, but it does raise, I think, a couple of issues, and one having to do with the historic nature of Alexandria. I'm working separately with a committee to try to determine how to best go forward with historic preservation districting in the city. And as you may know, there are several districts, only one of which has any power by ordinance, because the city has not adopted other historic districts like Town of Potomac or Rosemont into a codified enforcement such as the BAR exists for downtown historic Alexandria. And it may be that the neighborhoods don't want that. But the city used to be very encouraging of not only the historic designation as sort of a model of what we represent, but also the economic value of that. The people move here because we've got that. So having that
Or tourists.
is a huge worry for me. Why would you do that? We have in Del Rey alone sort of a diorama of development from north to south of 19th century, turn of the century, 1900 American culture and building and housing stock. and all the way through the Great Depression and World War II, sort of encapsulated in Delray. And why not recognize all of Delray as a historic district? Well, that's a question. It's an open question. It's one that needs to be studied. But with the support of the city, as it used to be, sort of glorifying this historic provenance that the city has, it would seem to me that we might begin to remember that there's economic value in that. That's why people come here to live. That's why people come here to shop. And to turn our backs on it would be foolish, I think. The other piece of this, and you may want to address that, but the other thing that I determined was a big missing component of all the discussions I heard about zoning for housing and density and where to build housing is what we do about open space.
Mm-hmm.
We have very limited land supply for public open space. Most of the open space, and you alluded to this, in the city is because of the open space nature of backyards and front yards in single family home development. And aside from the sort of politics around single family home development, which is already done and we're here,
Mm-hmm.
the fact that we would lose access to trees and soil that we need for things even other than water runoff control, to me is also a frightening proposition that all of these other decisions will be made without the context of what we're doing to the city on a more global environmental sort of basis.
Well, and once we traded it away, we can't get it back, right?
Global,
None of
global
this.
locally is what I'm saying. You know, it all starts.
Yeah, I would say globally, I think you're, as an architect, you're familiar with master plans. We don't have one in the city. We don't have a plan of where the schools go, where the parks go, where the trash goes, where the hospital goes, where the roads go, and how we get everyone there. Folks will say that, well, we have a master plan. It's all the small area plans just piled together. That's not a master plan. That's, we need a master plan as a city. It's not an exercise we've done. I realize to some it might seem like a waste of time and effort, but those small area plans matter. But how everything is connected, how we move people, all of that matters. And I think that's the other thing that gets to the open space is how much open space do we need? We know we need more, but without a master plan, it will always be sort of the first thing that gets traded away at the sort of micro level, individually, project by project. So I think that's one of the things that we're really missing. And I think, interestingly enough, you have really a diverse coalition who've been calling for that for a long time. You've got developers and development attorneys who want it. You've got planning commissioners who want it. You've got civic association leaderships who want it. And really, it seems like the only people who don't want a master plan is council and staff. To me, I think we need that. That gives us our direction. It also then identifies those opportunities for increasing density, as we talked about a little bit here, Eisenhower Valley. Another that's woefully underutilized is Van Dorn Metro. I mean, that is not only an opportunity for residential density, but also commercial density. What we need there, though, to fix that is we need better pedestrian improvement because it is a nightmare to get to and from that station. In a car is bad enough. On foot or on a bicycle is even worse. So I mean, that's a very specific example, but I think to your main point is we need that master plan as a city, which is not something we have. And then we also, as you're exactly right, that our historic nature is our strategic advantage. It's why people are moving here and not to Arlington and not to Fairfax. It's why people are coming from around the country to come here and around the world to come and visit. And it's not just the colonial, it's the Civil War, and then it is that sort of turn of the century modern architecture. I used to work for a member from Chicagoland, and we did the Frank Lloyd Wright tours through the south side of Chicago. Huge benefit for that part of the city that really is just a lot of housing. But it gave sort of, those restaurants and stuff a nice little boon, being in proximity of the Frank Lloyd Wright House. So I think that's what we need to be doing is making sure that not only making sure, but also communicating effectively that this strategic advantage is economically valuable. Either it's why our homes are so expensive and why our assessments keep going up, but it's also what brings the tourist here that drives the larger economic engine. So I think specifically to the historic preservation, we can't be trading away what is our strategic advantage that is something we have that no one else has. And then second, all of this stuff needs to be wrapped up into a master plan that puts it all down on a piece of paper. And it's not going to be one sheet of paper, but like, you know, that puts it all down and says, this is how much open space we need. If we expect to have 225,000 people in the city, and I just picked a number, this is how much open space we need. We need this many hospitals, we need this many schools. This is where they all need to be to serve our community. Because right now we don't have that. And it's this sort of patchworks of neighborhoods that frankly, in some cases, ends up pitting neighborhood against neighborhood.
Thanks.
Thank you.
I think that was a great summary. And Paul, I appreciate you bringing everybody up to speed on the conversations and the emails. One question, then Karen has Kate's question. She was able to send it before. Just simple yes or no. If Delray brought forth a plan for a historic district that provided some level of protections for what we are, would that be something you would support?
Yeah, I think yes, on face value. I think the question is, what does it look like? Does it have a bar?
How
those are the things.
a lot of
But
details,
yes,
but yeah.
yeah.
Cool.
No, I mean, I think it's a valid conversation that's worth having. And I think a plan coming forward is something that everyone running should be interested in taking a look at, because first off, if our residents are asking for something, we need to consider it. Even if we, don't like the idea at face value, it's our responsibility to listen to constituents and consider a proposal. And then second, we know that anything that comes forward is going to be tweaked and played with a little bit to make it work. But yeah, I absolutely think we need to look at something like that, because it is our strategic advantage. It's what makes Delray. And if we start trading this stuff, some of these things we can get back, other things we can't.
Okay, great. I appreciate that. And then for the last question, and Kathleen, if people have time, I just want to make sure that we end on time, and I don't know if Jimmy's got time. Karen, did you want to read her question, or do you want me to? You're on mute. You just won Zoom bingo.
Here I am. Okay. Here we go. No, Kate got pulled off on a work. Anyway, so she sent her question. And her question is, how do we restore trust in the city, especially in Delray? Kate cited misinformation regarding the arena, as well as smaller things like the Simpson Dog Park. She says that for her and her neighbors, there's little trust that the city is being honest with residents. And I'll just chime in here a little bit. When Nate and I first started Save Delray, and we would talk to neighbors, that was a common theme that we heard. It was the erosion of confidence, the erosion of trust in the city. And I think for a lot of us in this meeting tonight, zoning for housing was really the nail in the coffin when it was pushed through at a rapid rate, and a loud chorus of voices were not listened to.
Yeah. I think, look, once trust is lost, it's very hard to get it back. And I think you're even seeing, I'm pretty sure I've seen comments from both of the mayor candidates saying that trust has been fractured for a number of reasons. I think the most important thing is getting city council up City Hall. We need to not just come to your door every 3 years and ask you for your vote. We need to come to your door every time there's something occurring in the neighborhood that is going to significantly impact your neighborhood. We need to have town halls, and not just town halls that are structured in a way that is very specific.
With note cards?
Yeah. I think, but honestly, look, it's a big city. There's 150,000 people, but it's not that big, right? It is our job. It is city council. We are not running for governor. We are not running for president. It is our job to be accountable for you. We work for you. And that means we need to be talking to you, because if you don't know what your boss wants, how can you do your job? At the end of the day, the constituents are the boss. And we need to be listening to you. We need to be coming to your community. even if there's something that isn't necessarily moving in the near future, but we need to be coming to see what it is that your community needs. I think, a couple of years ago, 3 years ago, the issue of flooding really sort of hit the ceiling in the city because it was an election year, right? Otherwise, it wasn't like that flooding suddenly started 3 years ago. It was that it was an election year and it came forward and became an election issue. It doesn't mean that people weren't bailing out their basements for a decade before it. So I think we need to be in the community, out of City Hall, not behind the dais, having real conversations with you all. And those conversations can't just happen every 3 years when we come and knock on your door and ask you for your vote.
I appreciate that. So we are 2 minutes ahead of end time, and I believe on ending meetings earlier on time. So Jimmy, I'm going to turn it over to you for any closing comments that you may have. I want to thank everybody for the time that they spent this Sunday evening, especially considering how beautiful it was out. And I'm sure it was tough to get in front of your computer.
Very, very helpful.
Before,
good.
Jimmy, before you close, I just want to ask all of our neighbors that, if you like what you heard tonight, think you've really been very open and interested in what we've had to say, get a yard sign, introduce them to your neighbors or tell your neighbors about this. And we hope to have more forums, neighbors talking to candidates just like tonight, but please, it's a very viral community, so spread the word.
Yeah, no, it very much is. It's a community where people know everyone, and word of mouth matters more than I think anything. So yes, I did pop in my email, my cell phone number, and my website into the chat. Feel free to learn more about me. Feel free to reach out. I would hope that I could count on all of your support. Remember, you can start voting on Friday. May 3rd, you can go to 132 North Royal Street and cast your ballot on Friday. So the election is really upon us. There's 45 days of early vote, and yes, the primary is June 18th, but folks can start voting on Friday. So please, if you guys are thinking and you liked what you heard today, tell 5 friends, request a yard sign on the website. Happy to come over and do a meet and greet. I'm a big fan of St. Elmo's and Gustav, so happy to meet you all there. Taqueria Poblano is also a personal favorite, so happy to come down and meet anyone. If folks are willing to host something in your home, host something in a park, would just like to get in front of more of you and your neighbors to hear what matters to you, because that's the only way that we're going to get some of the changes that we're looking for in the city is by working to elect folks who are interested in listening, who are willing to have these conversations. So again, much like Nate, I appreciate all of your time. Thank you all so much for investing it in me. I know you have families and you have other things you could be doing right now. So thank you for taking the time to invest it in me. And I really do hope I can count on your support in the election coming up.
Thanks so much. I really appreciate everybody's time. We're going to be lining up more of these. If you like what you heard, encourage your neighbors to sign up for Safe Delaware emails and to attend our next sessions. And Kathleen, I know you've got a question, but I want to make sure we're respectful of time. I know Jimmy's got to run here. So, but if you want to email your question, we can get that answered and we'll circulate it around.
Would I send that to you?
I would send it to Jimmy and you're welcome to
send it to Jimmy. Okay.
Yeah.
Awesome. Thank you,
Thanks,
everybody.
everyone.
Have a great.
Thank you all for your time. Nice to meet you guys.
Thanks, Jimmy. Appreciate it. Take care.
Most helpful. Thank you. Okay.